cashless society? What does that look like? Today, I interview a journalist from one of the first countries to progressively pursue such an agenda.
While the CBN's push for digital payments is meant to bring winds of change, there are unanswered questions about the old notes as they continue to remain elusive to many Nigerians.
My money is in the bank and I'm supposed to be given on demand.
These frustrations highlight the issues at hand, prompting the question, is Nigeria fully prepared for cashless economy?
Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and I've read enough of your emails, your comments, and even heard from many of you in person while covering protests. A cashless society, a blanket central banking digital currency, is of concern for many of you. In Canada, the leading type of payment remains credit cards, and we're seeing more and more companies flat out refuse to accept our national currency. And just recently, the Bank of Canada admitted that they are, in fact, exploring the implementation of their very own CBDC. While it may be a relief to many of you that a cashless society for North Americans still seems to only be a possibility in a distant future, some say how quickly Nigerians were slapped with digital now or else policy should serve as a warning that you may be told to comply or not buy sooner than you think. Nigeria has been talking about going cashless for years, but at the end of last year, the Bank of Nigeria abruptly implemented restrictions to how much cash citizens could withdraw and suspended the use of their banknotes. The government says that the cashless policy should be welcomed as a way to combat inflation and fight corruption, such as money laundering, but the many who gathered in protests would say otherwise. At Rebel News, we bring you the other side of the story. If you appreciate that we do so, you can actually donate to cover our costs involved in doing that at rebelnews.com. But I don't have my boots on the ground in Nigeria. So I reached out to a mainstream media journalist, believe it or not, who did have her boots on the ground and spoke with some people there. Her name is Zainab Bala. She's with BBC Africa, and she's going to give us her take on how she thinks Nigerians are coping with the cashless agenda. Be sure to let us know in the comments what you think about what she has to say.
A lot of people think that the cashless policy came into fruition late last year, but really, the cashless policy was implemented late in 2012, but the implementation was a bit slow. And then when the Buhari government came prior to the end of his tenure, we saw the cashless policy really come into its full force as it was implemented across Nigeria. This came with a lot of mixed feelings for many, because a lot of people did not have prior education as to what the cashless policy was really meant to do at the time. And so a lot of people, when it came, felt like the government was kind of bombarding information and bringing something new on board. And so when it came into fruition, we had a restriction to a limit of 100,000 naira. You could not withdraw more than 100,000. And so many people were like, this is my money. How can they tell me this is the amount I'm supposed to withdraw from my own account? And it came with a lot of mixed feelings, particularly for those in rural areas. It was a bit understandable for those in urban areas because these are educated people, the elites live in the urban areas, but those in rural areas found it very, very difficult to key into the policy. And so talking to economists and financial experts, they say this is a great move, but there's a lot of lack of financial literacy education among the people in Nigeria, and which is why a lot of people reacted to that policy in that manner. And so there was chaos all over the place. There was so much pressure on banks disposing cash. The cash was not even available. And a lot of people, we saw a lot of hoarding going on. And so these are some of the things that we saw with the implementation of the cashless policy early this year.
So 100K Naira, that is approximately in Canadian dollars, about $200. Was that a limit on the daily amount that you could take out or the weekly amount at that time?
That was a daily amount you could take out.
Okay. And
at
so
that time.
as I've seen, you're right. A lot of the citizens were uncomfortable with this, especially in the rural areas. And there was something about banknotes. Banknotes was another way that people could, of course, use currency. And that was becoming no longer a legal currency. And some people were holding on to these banknotes, not wanting to turn them in. So what ended up happening with some of the people who were afraid of losing their life savings over the elimination of banknotes?
I would say it was tragic because of the report you saw earlier. I went to a bank here in Lagos, Nigeria, and I met a woman who is a pensioner. And she said this was her first time she was coming to the bank to withdraw her money, her pension money. And she had struggled and thrived so hard before she could have access to her money. And now she's here. And then the banks are telling her there's no cash. We can't give you cash. And even if we want to give you, there's a limit to what we can give you. And she was really, really sober. She had to shed a couple of tears. And it was really sad. And so many other people. In some places, I heard and I saw pictures and articles that a lot of women were dying in hospitals because there was no cash and transfers were not working at the time. There was a lot of disruption with internet. And so digital transfers were not really working at the time as well. And also that cost a lot of lives of many women, giving birth in certain hospitals across Nigeria. And so it was really, really tragic, I would say, when that came to be in it. And people are still trying to adjust to that right now.
Well, speaking of adjusting, at first there was a very low uptick on getting on board with the new digital currency, your central digital banking currency, which I believe is called e-Naira. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And of course, that's probably from some of the reasons that you identified. There's rural areas where there aren't banks close by. And then there's people who just didn't want to do this cashless society. And now we are seeing a spike in how many people have, of course, opened up these sort of e-banking options for themselves. Do you believe that's because the citizens are aware of the benefits of this? Or do you think they were backed into a corner where they couldn't buy or trade in order to survive?
I must say that following the massive implementation of the cashless policy, it was at that point that a lot of people got to really understand. It was at that point that a lot of articles, journalists, and just everybody was trying to put in the information for people to really understand what the policy is about. And I must say, at this point, people are beginning to key into that initiative, even though economists are still hampering on the fact that people in rural areas still need more information for them to actually benefit, from the cashless policy. You spoke about e-Naira earlier. When the e-Naira was launched, a lot of people we're attributing it to the Bitcoin, and people were like, "Oh, this looks a bit like Bitcoin. How am I going to save my money with this?" And so it did not really get the acceptance it needed. And up until now, we do not really have a lot of Nigerians actually keen into, saving even digital currency like the e-Naira in Nigeria's case, for instance. And so I think we have a long way to go, and particularly for people who are uneducated, the government really needs to do more to educate people about the benefits of, digital transactions, financial inclusion, because in the long run, everything is going digital, and we all need to key into that initiative in the long run. And so at the end of the day, everybody's saying, well, there's lack of that education out there, and that is what is hindering people from really, really keying into the cashless policy.
The governor of the Bank of Nigeria said that the destination, as far as he's concerned, is to achieve 100% cashless economy in Nigeria. And so you're saying it may take a little while, but do you think that your country will actually get to that point, or is it going to have to be a compromise?
Well, absolutely. I think we are on our way there. Just like I said earlier, a lot of people in the urban area are already getting used to the new reality. But the question still remains for those who are uneducated, for those who do not really understand what the policy is about, for the average market woman that sells fish, that sells tomatoes in the market. All they know is cash transactions. They want hard currency, and they do not really understand how digital transactions work. And so in that area, that's where the government needs to do, not just the government, individuals, civil society, and just everybody must put hands on deck to help prioritize that particular area of people that really need to understand what the policy is about and how it's going to benefit Nigeria as a nation.
Now, Nigeria is the biggest or one of the biggest economies in the continent of Africa. And there was a considerable adoption of currencies like Bitcoin. How are you aware of how that's been affected since the e-Naira has come out?
In the past, there has been a lot of controversy with regards to the Bitcoin. A lot of people still felt it was it didn't have that digital security. People fear that, okay, there's no digital security, and they didn't want to key into it because they did not understand it. And then over time, a lot of education came into the public space, and a lot of people began to understand how the Bitcoin market works, even though there were concerns about inconsistencies. But in the long run, we have quite a number of people, keying into the Bitcoin business in Nigeria. It's a big market here in Nigeria.
So it's still allowed. You're still allowed to use Bitcoin, even though e-Naira is out. You're not hearing of any sort of goal to sort of replace Bitcoin or anything like that, or ban it, like we've seen in China.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Well, thank you so much, Zainab, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Drea.
If you appreciate that Rebel News brought you this report, please consider chipping in to help keep our reports going strong. We don't take a penny from the federal government, like 95% of media in Canada. So if you go to rebelnews.com and click on the donate button, you are really helping support get the other side of the story out to the people.